FDA approval is permission to sell the drug. Payer approval is permission to get paid for it. They are not the same process and they do not happen at the same time. Meyer Osei, Arventa Global. Clinical Trial Manager. HEOR, Health Economics and Outcomes Research, is the discipline that translates clinical trial data into the economic and humanistic value language that payers use to make formulary decisions. The Clarity 301 primary endpoint is progression-free survival. That is a clinically meaningful outcome for patients. It is not the primary outcome that health technology assessment bodies use to make reimbursement decisions. NICE in England, GBA in Germany, HAS in France, they want cost-effectiveness. Quality-adjusted life years. Economic models that combine clinical outcomes data with utility weights, treatment costs, and downstream healthcare resource use. The Clarity 301 trial collected patient-reported outcomes, the AERC QLQC 30 Quality of Life Questionnaire, and the disease-specific QLQLC 13, specifically to provide the utility data for these models. The AMP Dossier, the standard payer submission format in the United States, compiles the clinical evidence, the economic model, and the real-world evidence to support formulary listing. U.S. payers focus on clinical differentiation more than formal cost-effectiveness analysis, but the total cost of care argument, veliratinib's tolerability reducing hospitalizations for toxicity management, matters to pharmacy benefit managers. Approval in the U.S. HTA submissions in Europe simultaneously. Reimbursement is a multi-year parallel process. Agentforce market access intelligence, HTA submission tracking, payer coverage monitoring, formulary status by plan, health economics and outcomes research, the value translation function. Health economics and outcomes research, HEOR, is the scientific discipline that measures and communicates the economic, clinical, and humanistic value of medical interventions. In the pharmaceutical industry, HEOR bridges the gap between clinical trial results, efficacy and safety data, generated to support FDA approval, and the outcomes-based value evidence that payers, health technology assessment bodies, and health systems use to make coverage and reimbursement decisions. HEOR methods include cost-effectiveness analysis, comparing the cost per unit of health outcome, typically the cost per quality-adjusted life year, or QALY, for new treatment versus the current standard of care. Budget impact analysis, estimating the total cost to a payer of adding a new drug to its formulary, accounting for the eligible patient population, the drug price, and the cost offsets from avoided hospitalizations or other healthcare resource use. Patient-reported outcomes research, measuring health-related quality of life using validated instruments such as the AERC QLQC 30, the EC5D, or disease-specific tools to generate the utility weights used in QALY calculations. And real-world evidence generation, using claims data, electronic health records, and patient registries to characterize how the drug performs in the broader population outside the controlled trial setting. For Clarity 301, the HEOR team was embedded in the clinical development program from Phase 2. The quality of life instruments were added to the protocol, the health resource utilization data was collected at each visit, and the economic model structure was developed alongside the clinical data collection. Health technology assessment, the European reimbursement gatekeepers. In most European markets, regulatory approval by EMA does not automatically result in reimbursement. The drug must separately pass through a national or regional health technology assessment, HTA, process that evaluates its value and determines whether, and at what price, it will be reimbursed by the national health system. The key European HTA bodies include NICE, National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, in England and Wales, uses cost-effectiveness analysis, with a willingness to pay threshold of approximately £20, 000 £30, 000 per QALY, with flexibility for end-of-life treatments up to £50, 000 per QALY. GBA, Gemeinsamer Bundesausschuss in Germany, uses a benefit assessment methodology, AMNOG process, that rates the added benefit of the new drug versus the appropriate comparator on a 6-level scale. Has Haute Autorité de Santé in France rates added medical benefit ASMR on a 5-level scale, and AIFA in Italy, TLV in Sweden, and similar bodies in other markets. Each HTA body has its own methodology, preferred comparator selection, and quality of life instrument requirements, meaning that a single global clinical trial must be designed to generate evidence that is relevant to multiple, methodologically distinct assessment frameworks. The EMA HTA regulation, effective from January 2025, introduced a joint clinical assessment process for the most innovative oncology drugs, providing a single European clinical assessment that individual member states then use for their national pricing and reimbursement decisions. Dossier, the U.S. payer submission standard. In the United States, the Academy of Managed Care Pharmacy, AMP format for formulary submissions, provides a standardized template for pharmaceutical companies to present clinical and economic evidence to managed care organizations, pharmacy benefit managers, and integrated delivery networks for formulary review. The AMP dossier includes a product overview, the clinical evidence section, summarizing Clarity 301 design, results, safety, and how the drug compares to current standard of care. The economic value section, the budget impact model for the payer's member population and the cost-effectiveness model if applicable, and a real-world evidence section. U.S. payers do not have a formal cost-effectiveness threshold like NICE-CALI framework. The FDA does not permit explicit cost-effectiveness arguments in promotional materials, but economic modeling is routinely included in AMP dossiers and discussed in payer contracting negotiations. The practical U.S. payer value argument for velloratinib focuses on clinical differentiation versus docetaxel in a molecularly selected population, higher response rate, longer PFS, more durable response, tolerability advantages that reduce emergency department visits and hospitalizations for toxicity management, and the availability of a companion diagnostic test that identifies the eligible patient population precisely. Companion diagnostic, the market access parallel track. Velloratinib's approval is linked to a companion diagnostic, an FDA-approved test that identifies patients with RET fusion-positive NSCLC who are eligible to receive the drug. The companion diagnostic is co-developed and co-submitted with the NDA. The Clarity 301 protocol specified a central laboratory NGS assay as the trial's qualifying test, and Arventa partnered with a diagnostic company to develop a commercial companion diagnostic validated against the central lab assay. FDA's approval of velloratinib includes the companion diagnostic approval. The PI specifies that patients must be selected using an FDA-approved test before receiving velloratinib. For payer reimbursement, the companion diagnostic creates a natural utilization management mechanism. Payers can require documentation of a positive RET fusion result from an approved test as a prior authorization requirement, ensuring that velloratinib is restricted to the patient population for whom evidence of benefit exists. The market access team must ensure that the companion diagnostic is commercially available, covered by medical benefit, typically under a laboratory CPT code, and accessible at the sites where velloratinib will be prescribed. Because a drug without a commercially available diagnostic is a drug that cannot be prescribed. Real-world evidence, the post-approval value generation agenda. Clinical trial evidence, generated in a highly selected, protocol-compliant patient population with intensive safety monitoring and 100% treatment adherence, may not fully represent how velloratinib will perform in the broader population of RET fusion-positive NSCLC patients treated in routine clinical practice. Real-world evidence, RWE generation, using data from electronic health records, claims databases, patient registries, and observational cohort studies, is an important component of the post-approval evidence agenda, serving multiple purposes: supporting payer formulary decisions, demonstrating that trial results translate to real-world practice, expanding the approved indication, if real-world evidence shows benefit in patient populations not included in Clarity 301, such as patients with ECOG performance status greater than 1 or prior RET inhibitor exposure, and generating the long-term safety and effectiveness data that prescribers and patients need. The HEOR team's post-approval RWE plan, designed before velloratinib's approval, in coordination with regulatory affairs, to ensure the study designs comply with FDA's RWE guidance and market access, to ensure the evidence generated addresses payer coverage questions, is a multi-year evidence generation program that runs in parallel with commercial operations. The day FDA approved veleratinib, my job changed. Everything I built over 5 years, the sites, the data, the clinical relationships, became the foundation for a commercial launch, and I had to hand most of it over. Osei, Arventa Global, Clinical Trial Manager. The clinical team and the commercial team operate under a firewall. Medical Affairs, not commercial, owns the clinical relationships with the investigators who ran Clarity 301. Those investigators are now thought leaders in RET fusion-positive NSCLC. Medical Science Liaisons, MSL, are the field medical team that maintains those relationships post-approval. They are not salespeople. They respond to unsolicited medical questions, support investigator-initiated research, and communicate clinical data within the bounds of the approved label. The commercial team, sales, marketing, managed care, does the promotion. Separate from medical, always separate. My handoff document to the clinical operations team, 45 sites, all trained on veleratinib, all with experience managing the toxicity profile, all with active patients transitioning from trial to commercial drug. These sites are launch-ready. They understand the drug better than any community oncologist will for the next 2 years. In Q1, we had 67 commercial prescriptions from Clarity 301 principal investigators. The trial sites seeded the launch. The drug is approved. The patients who need it can get it. That's the point of everything that came before. Agentforce launch readiness tracking, MSL coverage maps, commercial prescription analytics, formulary access status by plan, medical commercial firewall, the structural separation post-approval. Upon drug approval, the pharmaceutical company's interactions with healthcare providers bifurcate into 2 distinct channels governed by different rules, oversight structures, and compliance requirements. The medical channel, managed by Medical Affairs, including Medical Science Liaisons, MSL, medical information, and medical education, is responsible for scientific exchange with the clinical community. Medical Affairs can discuss data within and, in some contexts, beyond the approved label, for example, discussing the mechanism of action, pharmacokinetic data, or off-label clinical questions in response to unsolicited physician inquiries, and can support investigator-initiated research by investigators who develop their own study protocols using commercially available drug. The commercial channel, managed by sales, marketing, and market access, is limited to promoting veleratinib for its FDA-approved indication using promotional materials that have been reviewed and approved by the Promotional Review Committee, PRC, which includes medical, regulatory, and legal reviewers. The medical commercial firewall is not merely an organizational preference. It is a compliance requirement enforced by FDA regulations on promotional activities and by the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, PHRMA code. Any interaction where commercial representatives influence or direct MSL activities, or where MSL interactions are used to extend the reach of commercial messaging, is a compliance violation. Medical Science Liaisons, the field medical function. MSLs are field-based scientific experts who serve as the primary interface between a pharmaceutical company's medical affairs function and the clinical and scientific community. Unlike sales representatives, MSLs are not measured on prescription volume. Their performance metrics focus on scientific exchange quality, KOL relationship development, investigator-initiated study pipeline, and medical information request management. For veleratinib's launch, Arventa's MSL team consists of oncology-specialized MSLs deployed regionally across the U.S., with concentrated coverage at the 45 Clarity 301 clinical trial sites. Because the PIs and their teams have the most experience with veleratinib and are most likely to have detailed clinical questions about the drug's mechanism, pharmacokinetics, and management of the toxicity profile. MSLs engage with clinical investigators in response to unsolicited scientific inquiries, a physician calling medical information or directly contacting an MSL with a specific clinical question. They present clinical data at educational programs organized by academic institutions or professional societies, not company-sponsored promotional programs, and they facilitate clinical research activities, including investigator-initiated trials, independent studies designed and conducted by investigators using commercially available veleratinib. IITs can generate important evidence in patient populations not studied in Clarity 301 and can deepen the clinical community's experience with the drug. Transition of clinical trial patients to commercial drug. One of the most complex operational challenges at the time of approval is managing the transition of patients who are still receiving veleratinib on the clinical trial to commercial supply. These patients, who may have been on the drug for months or years at the time of approval, cannot simply continue receiving clinical trial supply, which is a controlled, IND-regulated material, after the IND is closed. The commercial transition process involves notifying active sites and patients of the approval and the transition plan, working with the commercial team and specialty pharmacy distribution network to ensure commercial supply is available and covered by the patient's insurance, coordinating with patient assistance programs for patients who lack commercial coverage, and managing the administrative closeout of the IND for the Clarity 301 patients who are transitioning. Some patients may have been on veleratinib for years without progression. They are on a drug they know is working, and any disruption to their supply is a patient safety issue, not just an operational inconvenience. The CTM's role in the commercial transition is to ensure that no Clarity 301 patient experiences a gap in drug access because of the commercial handoff. Launch seeding effect, clinical trial sites as commercial anchors. The 45 Clarity 301 clinical trial sites are Arventa's most important commercial accounts at launch. These sites, major academic medical centers and high-volume community oncology practices, have deep experience with veleratinib. The clinical teams have enrolled and managed patients on the drug, understand the toxicity profile and dose modification guidelines, have established RET fusion testing protocols, and have treated patients who have responded well. In many cases, the principal investigators are national thought leaders in lung oncology who will publish the Clarity 301 results, present at ASCO and OCR, and train colleagues at other institutions in the management of RET fusion-positive NSCLC. The commercial prescriptions generated from Clarity 301 principal investigator sites in the first commercial quarter. 67 prescriptions in the first quarter for veleratinib represent the drug spreading from a clinical trial context to commercial practice at institutions where the clinical teams are confident in the drug's benefit-risk profile. This launch seeding dynamic is a direct consequence of the clinical operations investment. Every site that enrolled patients, every coordinator trained, every clinical relationship built during the trial is now an asset for the commercial launch. IND closeout, completing the clinical operations lifecycle. After the NDA is approved and commercial supply is available, the IND for Clarity 301 must be formally closed. IND closeout involves completing all outstanding SAE reports and regulatory submissions, archiving the trial master file, which must be retained for 15 years from the date of approval or 2 years from the date of discontinuation of the IND, whichever is longer, notifying all participating investigator sites that the IND is closing and providing instructions for site record retention, returning or destroying all unused investigational drug supply under documented procedures, completing all ongoing regulatory submissions, any pending IND amendments, annual reports, or SUSAR, and submitting the IND discontinuation notice to FDA. For the CTM, IND closeout is the final chapter of a clinical program that began with the initial IND submission and ends with a complete, inspection-ready archive of every document generated during the conduct of the trial. The TMF, every protocol version, every informed consent form, every monitoring visit report, every deviation log, every SAE report, every DSMB recommendation, is the permanent record of how this drug was developed and why it was approved. It will be reviewed by FDA inspectors for years after approval. It is the job I did, documented.